And I know that there'll be other people joining us. Oh, Terry, welcome back. We're so glad to see you. And Biz, thanks for mentioning, and Jackie, thanks for mentioning. We certainly want the chat to keep going. My name is Debbie Rosen, and behind the scenes we have Lindsay Toms here at the Study Pro, and we are the owners of the Study Pro. I'm the founder and owner, and we'll just start by sharing a little bit about who we are. We're super excited about Rachel's presentation, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But for those of you who do not know the Study Pro, we are an executive function and study skills center. We're based in downtown McLean. We have a 4,000 square foot space here that is being very sparsely utilized at this moment, but we are doing a lot of online work with students. We do support all the things that you see here on the screen. Executive function itself is a long conversation. I was actually thinking about the fact that we should have our own webinar to help parents understand, because we're seeing a lot of the stress on the executive functions happening right now, especially during distance learning. But as we said here, it's really any kind of learning where you need the skills to break down your work, initiate your work, break down your work, move through your work, and have kind of the emotional control and the initiation that is required to get the work done. And sometimes it's actually, the whole area of executive function can be very non-intuitive, like a lot of the things Rachel will talk about in terms of our behaviors and our relationships. And so a lot of times things like making lists of work that we have to do is actually counterintuitive, in the sense that it can stress students out. And we really help with students converting that list into a plan, because plans are a key initiation strategy. Chunking work is the key initiation strategy. And working with support like coaches and in our homework center is something that's we found to be really helpful for students that may have missing work or have a hard time getting started or even need subject matter support. So we do hope that if you don't know us, that you get to know us a little bit better. And we're so excited every month to have these conversations, and never more excited than when we have Rachel here with us. So we're going to kind of launch right into that part at this point. But we always start with something that's, we think, a little bit funny. So as you can read this, you lied, my kids are not a joy to have in class, which of course is no offense to anybody's kids or the institutions with which they learn, but I just thought it was funny, and I thought maybe hopefully a couple of you guys will laugh. Please share in the chat if you thought it was funny. But anyway, my daughter was here learning every day during remote learning, whether the whole place was empty or there were maybe a couple of others. But I will say that sometimes she was not a joy to have in my class, depending on the stress level she had, which is really the theme of what we're going to be talking about today. Thank you, Naomi, for saying so funny, because I was a little worried about that one, but my daughter's name is Naomi as well, so I always like to hear that. Well, Rachel is more than just all the things that she shared in the slide, and she'll talk a little bit, or I share in the slide, she'll talk a little bit more about her background. She does have a master's in clinical psychology and has previous experience as an ADHD coach and in-home mentor therapist, and of course is a parenting specialist. I added the extraordinaire because I think she is. One of the things that I find in my parenting journey is that at every moment I listen to parenting type presentations, I take something different away because of where I am in my life, and because my son, who turned 21 and just got his own car finally, without the goal of it meeting a tree, which I think is perfect, that his brain has matured enough that at 21 he can have that responsibility. So I'm excited about that. And my 7th grader. And so we're always at different places. And our goal for today is really to help parents, ourselves as individuals. How can we make deposits into ourselves? How can we make it into our children? And I think you'll find that it's so much more that you actually expected, even when you came here and thinking it's about deposits to your children. It is so much more, because we all need to think about what the emotional needs are that we ourselves have, so that we can give to our kids, and we can give to our spouses and our partners and our friends and our colleagues. And so that's really what we're here to talk about. And so the format of the presentation today is going to be a Q&A, because we like to have a little bit of a back and forth. And one of the concepts that we wanted to start talking about was this idea of yuck. And you probably kind of get a sense of what yuck's about. But this is Rachel's term, yuck. And so, of course, if we are having a great day and we're really happy and we're full, our emotional buckets are full, then we are much more likely to be less reactive. We're much more likely to be able to have a longer thread with our kids, a longer sense of, you know, our wick, if you will, on our candle before we kind of explode. And so we thought we would start with, of course, introducing Rachel, but also letting her talk a little bit about this main concept that she has, because in the theme of what we're talking about today with regard to deposits and relationships, our yuck and our children's yuck is so central to how we can make deposits or also potentially make withdrawals. So I'll turn it over to you, Rachel, and let you share a little bit about what yuck is. And again, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. And thank you. I'm always, it's such a pleasure to work with you with the Study Pro. So thank you for having me here. And I am particularly excited to talk about the concept of yuck now because it is so pervasive. So let me explain what I call the yuck factor, which is a very simple idea. But once you hear it, you start to see it everywhere, not just in your kids, but in yourself and in your spouse and in your friends. So the yuck factor is a very simple idea that when human beings, as you were starting to say, Debbie, when human beings are in a good place, we act positively. When we are in a good place, we are more calm and patient with our children. We respond in a way that makes us feel good later. But when any human being is in a place of yuck, and yuck is a blanket term I use to describe anything uncomfortable. So yuck could be that we're hungry or tired. Yuck could be that we're disappointed or frustrated, angry, worried, sad. Yuck is anything uncomfortable. Whenever we are in a place of yuck, we do not act positively. So when we are in this place of yuck, we are not calm, we are not patient, we are not thoughtful. When we're hungry, we snap at our kids. When we are, feeling frustrated, we are going to lose our temper more quickly. And in fact, what's interesting is what you have on this slide, that human behavior actually has so much more to do with how we are doing inside than what's going on around us. And you can even think about it this way as a parent. When you are in a good place, your children may be arguing or maybe they're talking back, whatever it is they're doing. When you're in a good place, sure, you get annoyed, but you respond in one way. But if you're not in a good place, if you're in a place of yuck because maybe you're tired or things have just gone wrong that day, you can respond completely differently to the same exact thing happening outside of you. So yuck plays such a huge role in our behavior. And there's actually a scientific reason for this. So there is a part of the brain that allows us to act mature and responsible and really act consistently with our values. So if we say, okay, I want to be calm, I want to be patient, the part of the brain that helps us do that is called the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the brain, front part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex does allow us to control our impulses and think about what are our values and how can we, plan our behavior to align. So that's the mature, responsible part of the brain. We're going to talk more about kids today and their yuck, but I will say that this mature, responsible part of the brain, a lot of people know, does not fully develop until the mid-20s. So they don't even have a fully developed, mature, responsible part of the brain. But what happens for any human of any age is that when we are in yuck, some sort of discomfort, our brain senses yuck as a threat, so it turns on an alarm, and that alarm is our fight or flight response. And our fight or flight response is responsible for protecting us. And one of the things that it does is it shuts down any part of the brain that it feels is unnecessary for survival. So it actually shuts down our access to our prefrontal cortex, to the mature, responsible, impulse control, values-based part of our brain. It actually shuts down multiple parts of our brain. So when we are in yuck, we can't even access that part of our brain. And that's why, if your child hasn't listened to you, you've told them to get back on their online learning, or you've asked them to stop rushing through your homework, you've told them 5 times, you're really frustrated. At this point, you're going to go into yuck. And even though you know that yelling doesn't get you a better result, and you know that threatening to take away their device doesn't get you a better long-term result, in that moment when you are in yuck, you can't access the part of the brain that will remind you of that. So when we are in yuck, we are not mature, we are not responsible, we're not even logical. That's because we are being controlled by our fight or flight response. So yuck plays such a huge role in behavior. And here's the last thing I will say to wrap up this question, that we really want to keep in mind that when people are in yuck, we don't act positively, but the opposite is also what you want to keep in mind. This is a big topic that I talk about with parents. When someone is not behaving positively, when someone is in yuck, they can't behave positively. But the opposite is that when someone is not behaving positively, chances are they are in yuck. And we forget to address the yuck, and that's why we don't see change. So you really want to think about if you are behaving negatively, if your child is behaving negatively, there is yuck involved. And if you do not address the yuck, and very honestly, most of what we do makes yuck worse. And so if you don't address this, the behavior doesn't change, at least not in the long run. So that's kind of a quick summary of yuck.
Yep. And I know we're going to be talking a lot about the whole idea of yuck throughout this, because it is, as I said, so central to this relationship that we want to have with our children. And of course, the title of this is about the making deposits to that relationship. It's much easier to make deposits, A, when we're not in yuck, where we recognize that we're in yuck and we can do something about it, and B, when our kids are in yuck and we're not reacting to their yuck because we see that need, as we like to say, behind the behavior. But of course, we know that there's a lot of anxiety going on right now, and the two things that that anxiety recounts on is uncertainty and lack of control. Two huge things that we have going on in our lives right now, especially with COVID. So, how does yuck look different in COVID, knowing that we have this uncertainty, lack of control in droves here right now?
Yeah. So there was a lot of yuck before COVID. I mean, very honestly, we can remember it's less than a year ago now. A lot of us were stressed. A lot of us had these, hard relationships going on. There was a lot of yuck. However, I think there was parent yuck, there was child yuck, but it's even more now, especially I'm seeing in children and adolescents. Almost everybody these days is in some sort of yuck. And I think what's particularly significant is what you were saying, Debbie, that this yuck now is related to safety and security. Before it may have been, well, I can't get my kids out of the house in the morning, or, they're rushing through their schoolwork, or they're not studying, which all of that is real. I'm not minimizing that in any way, because I'm still helping parents with that. But very, very important to keep in mind that there are threats to our safety. So if we're talking about our fight or flight response and our yuck, our fight or flight response is incredibly in tune with our safety, our security. And right now that's at risk. I mean, there aren't really bigger risks to our safety and security than, am I going to lose a job? Am I going to be healthy? Is my family going to get sick? So there's a lot of that piece of health and safety. And then yes, the predictability is really what helps the brain feel safe. And that's not present right now. One of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later is that our brain doesn't just want, but needs a sense of control. And I always say that, do you remember in the beginning of COVID, there was this big rush to get toilet paper? Like you couldn't get toilet paper or paper towels. What that was, and there were a lot of contributing factors, but truly, if you think about it, we were feeling extraordinarily out of control. And what happens is when our brain feels out of control, we'll find a way to get control back, which is why some of your kids, by the way, are very strong-willed. We could talk about that at some point. But when the brain feels out of control, we'll try to get control back. So a lot of us were even beneath the conscious level. We were thinking, I can't control what's happening, but I can make sure my family has enough toilet paper. And then we go to the store and do what we can. We control what we can. When there's a lot of yuck, you see a lot of, sort of illogical behavior, and very honestly, a lot of negative behavior as well.
Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense to me. I know we've seen some comments that yuck seems to be commonplace with some kids right now, and that it's pre-COVID for sure, because we have different kinds of challenges just running all over the place. From place to place to place, and time seemed to be the biggest crunch for so many of us. So we're moving into this idea of, again, trying to have the base of understanding of how to build better relationships and make more deposits. I will say that I have always loved this concept of deposits and withdrawals. And Rachel, I've shared with you personally that with my son, it was something that really helped him to understand the relationship between us, this idea of deposits and withdrawals. And I'm like, okay, this is really a withdrawal moment for you because you're withdrawing from my bank account, emotional bank account. But our kids feel that their biggest emotions are safest with us. We don't see those big emotions usually at school and usually with friends. But when they come home from school, whether it's online or get off of school, I guess you call it now, like hanging up the phone, nobody comes home from school anymore, but some people I know are back. But um, they are giving their biggest emotions. Maybe it's around homework and getting started, or maybe it's around friendships or things like that. They're giving those biggest emotions to us because they feel that, we can handle it. So, do you see as the relationship between yuck and behavior? We know we talked a little bit about it, but maybe you can share a little bit more in terms of the concept of deposits and withdrawals. And
Absolutely.
what do we do with our yuck?
So there's a huge relationship between yuck and behavior, very honestly. And what's happening is now you understand that when someone is in a place of discomfort, they are in yuck, but very few people, think about the percentage of people who can do this, and I'm talking adults too. Very few people say, hey, I'm feeling very disappointed right now. I need to go and walk away, or can I please have a hug? There are people who can do that. Very few children and adolescents can do that, and I would say most adults don't do that. When we're feeling frustrated, when we're feeling angry, when we're feeling out of control, it tends to come out in our behavior. And one of the things as a behavior expert, I will say, and I'm sure many of you have heard this already, is behavior is a symptom. It's simply a symptom. It's a way of people communicating what's happening inside. So absolutely, there are what I call yuck behaviors. So when someone is in a place of yuck or discomfort, unless we have healthy coping mechanisms, which some people absolutely do, most people do not, unless we have these healthy coping mechanisms, you see these behaviors instead. So I always say that humans do there are three ways we tend to cope with yuck, and absolutely people can do all three of these things. So one of the things I suggest those of you who are listening do is think about your quote unquote most challenging child. Think about, the one that you see the behaviors and you're just like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Now, as I'm describing this, I want you to start to see their behavior as a symptom very likely of yuck. So the first type of yuck behavior is turning yuck out. Yuck turned out is where a child or an adult has a lot of yuck inside, they're angry, they're frustrated, and they take it out on other people. So as adults, we may yell at our kids when we're in yuck. What is also yuck turned out could be aggression. Young kids, even adolescents to some degree, are slamming doors, or really young kids may be hitting or kicking. There's yelling involved. That's their yuck turned out on other people. Yuck turned out could also be disrespect. You ask your child to finish their homework and they say, I know, will you just leave me alone? That's their yuck, right? That probably sounds familiar to a lot of people. That's their yuck because they don't want to do their homework and they're taking it out on you. Yuck turned out could also be defiance, where they're simply ignoring you. Yuck turned out, I just did a podcast episode on this one. Yuck turned out could be blame. You say to your child, hey, did you take out the trash? And they say, you should have told me sooner, even though you probably did remind them, but they're in yuck, they're not being logical, and they blame. So those are examples of yuck turned out. So when you see these behaviors, very likely whoever's doing these behaviors is in yuck. And this is not an excuse, by the way. My job is to help reduce yuck so this doesn't happen, or to cope with yuck. Second type of behavior is yuck turned in. These tend to be more introverted kids and adults, but I will tell you as a former therapist that a lot of people who turn their yuck out also turn it in eventually, or even quickly they turn it in. Yuck turned in it's usually very obvious through the negative self-talk. So kids who say, I'm stupid, I'll never be able to do this. Why should I even try? Yuck turned in could be low motivation. I used to see this a lot as a therapist. I would have, especially adolescents, teenagers say to me, I know I'm not going to do it, or it takes so much energy to do it and do it well that I'm not even going to try. It's exhausting. I'd rather not try than try and fail. So that could be yuck turned in. It's like sabotaging. Yuck turned in could also eventually become low self-esteem. Anxiety is a lot of yuck, a lot of feelings that instead of actually processing, they're holding on, and it can turn into a lot of anxiety. So that's yuck turned in. So the last thing that can happen, and this starts to happen, I would say, at about age 7 or 8. So really young kids aren't quite doing this yet, although some younger are. As adults, we do this all the time. And this is numbing yuck. Most people, again, don't have healthy ways to process their yuck. So it starts to build up and build up and build up. And then we have to find a way to, quote unquote, numb it. Numbing, very honestly, are things like alcohol. Now, there's a reason that the alcohol industry is booming right now. Not surprisingly, a lot of us are numbing our yuck. A lot of parents I work with are like, I'm drinking wine earlier, I'm drinking wine more, so it gets me through my day. That's a yuck number. Other ways of numbing yuck for adults could be, zoning out on news or sports or even social media. It could be shopping, whatever we do to sort of numb. What kids tend to turn to, and food, by the way, food is mine. When I'm not in a good place, I will turn to food or sugar. What kids tend to do is they turn to devices very often. They'll just numb on their screens. They also turn to sugar. I work with a lot of families, parents are saying, I find these sugar wrappers under my pillow, under my child's pillow, or they're sneaking at night and getting ice cream. It could be, it could be something that seems like a good behavior, reading, but they're reading for hours and hours, and it's how they're actually tuning out from the world. So it's just whatever they do to numb. So these are the 3 types of behaviors. So again, I want you to think about your challenging child, although everybody usually has 1, 2, or 3 of these types of behaviors. And when you see them, I want you to start to think, they're not, they're struggling. If they're doing these things, there's a problem. There's a struggle underneath this behavior, and that's what we have to address. If we want the behavior to change in the long run, that's what we have to address.
Yes, and I think here's a little bit of a visual for you, and I don't know if you want to add anything here, but to describe the visual.
Yeah, I would love to describe this. And just, I'm seeing the question, yes, yuck turned in absolutely can become depression. Very, very true. That's a lot of yuck turned in. And yuck is, no, it's not an acronym. Yuck is just yuck. Yuck came out, honestly, I've been talking about yuck for probably 12 or 13 years. It just sort of came out of my mouth one day as I was describing something. And I was like, oh, you know what? That just makes a lot of sense. And I've been using it ever since. So it's yuck. Maybe I should make it into an acronym. That would be a good idea. For right now, it's not. So here's what happens when it comes to, it's great as it is. Thank you. That's very kind. Here's what happens with yuck. Now, see, if you've now thought about your sort of difficult child, now think about this cycle. This is what, especially when I used to go into homes for a living, I saw this so quickly. Now I don't go into homes anymore, but I work with parents and I see this in almost every single family. So think about this. Your interaction with a child, it could be your challenging child, it could not be, but there's what I call a cycle of yuck. So what happens is, let's say you're even in a good place. You're not in yuck, but you see your child displaying some sort of yuck behavior. So maybe they're being mean to their brother or sister. You walk into the room, you were fine, but their yuck behavior triggers yuck in you. So you see them being mean and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so awful. They can't treat their brother or sister like that. Puts you into yuck. And your yuck response may be to yell or say, how could you do that? Your yuck response puts them deeper into yuck. So they start becoming, maybe they turn their yuck on you and say, why don't you care about what happened to me? And we see this cycle of yuck because their response puts you deeper into yuck. And this cycle of yuck happens in homes. This is going to happen a lot around schoolwork. This is going to happen a lot around, I work with families to find out what are your triggers. Certain subjects will definitely create this cycle of yuck. And this is also true in marriages. This is true in any relationship, any interactive relationship. You're going to see these cycles of yuck. And that's why it's so important to understand when behaviors are simply symptoms. And if all we're doing is reacting to the behavior, we get stuck in these cycles.
Yes, I was going to say you could take out the word childs and put husbands or wives, I'm sure, or whatever, because that's who we usually get it mostly from.
Yes.
But I definitely see that cycle happening. And one of the things we want to talk about in terms of why we want to avoid the trap is that, again, the theme of this whole presentation is that we want to build better relationships with our children. And the last part is really where we're going to talk about the emotional needs. But it's important to talk about this part up front, I think, because we have a chance to be non-reactive to this whole yuck cycle and almost laugh in our heads. But sometimes it is, and I'm previewing a little bit of what I know you're going to talk about, but sometimes it is about that tape we play in our heads. They have no right to speak to me that way. I can't believe they're doing that. They're being disrespectful. And so we're allowing their behavior to act as a trigger. So for example, in the mornings, I go and wake my daughter up and, there are days she's like beautiful light and sunshine. Okay, mom, good morning. I love you. And others, they're like, as if I've already pissed her off, excuse my language, and it's like, whoa, it's not even 6 a.m. and I'm tired too, right? And even this morning I walked back and thank God, Rachel's going to be talking to us again this morning. So I needed that reinforcement to not react to the yuck because, we can, as I like to say, climb the ladder and this is about, I think, what we're about to talk about, where, we just go up and up and up, and it just keeps us in that cycle. So I think that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here.
Yeah. So one of the ways we get out of this cycle is, very honestly, to stop parenting so much in the moment, which is really what's going to lead us to these deposits that we're going to talk about very shortly. And I want to talk about why in the moment parenting is particularly hard. What I'm about to show you with this emotions curve is how can we respond to yuck in a way that reduces this cycle or gets us out of this cycle of yuck. But I'm going to be very honest with you all. This is not easy. And as I describe it to you, you'll get a clinical understanding of what you're supposed to do. I'm not that good at this. I talk about this for hours and hours and hours a week. I work a lot and I'm always talking about this. I'm not even that good at it. I want you to know what to do in the moment, because everyone comes to me and says, Rachel, how do I handle this in the moment? I'm going to be very honest. In the moment parenting is mostly about emotional regulation and yuck regulation, not about getting someone to change their behavior. And you'll see why as I explain this slide. So I do want to tell you how to get out of this cycle of yuck by explaining this emotions curve or yuck curve. And this is what basically happens when a human being is in yuck. So you see the rainbow-shaped curve in the middle of this slide, that represents yuck over time. So when you say to your child, no, you can't go to your friend's house because you didn't finish your homework, what happens is they're frustrated and disappointed because they wanted to go to their friend's house. And as they realize you're not giving in to them, their yuck gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually it reaches a peak. That's usually when their behaviors, their yuck behaviors, are the biggest. That's when they're disrespectful and defiant. I hate you. And I've been looking forward to this. You're the worst parent ever. No one else does that. That's their yuck behavior. When it reaches the peak, that's when it's at its worst. Eventually, though, it does come down. And I could give you the physiological explanation of emotions in the body and their purpose. I would bore you to death. Just know that eventually they end. What you want to keep in mind as the adult, as the parent, is that once someone is on this curve, they can't access that prefrontal cortex. So you see the box, the rectangle to the left, the rectangle to the right. They can't access their positive behavior, their rational thought. They can't even put things in perspective to realize, hey, you can go see your friend when you're finished your homework. They can't realize that in that moment because that all comes from the prefrontal cortex. So in the moment, we say to our kids, stop talking to me like that, because we've responded to their behavior with our yuck, and they get more upset. So what we have to realize is how this works, that we can't actually expect to snap them out of yuck like that. It's not going to happen. We absolutely, it is our responsibility as parents to help them find different coping mechanisms, but there's nothing that's going to snap them out of it in the moment. There's nothing that's going to snap us out of it in the moment. The fight or flight response is very, very strong in human beings. And think about it, if it weren't strong, we wouldn't be here. Our ancestors had a strong fight or flight response. They survived, they reproduced. That's why we're here. Very, very strong response. So we can't expect the positive behavior, rational thought when they're on the yuck curve. So the question becomes obviously, okay, well, how do we get them out of this curve more quickly? And it is hard, but I will tell you most of what we do makes it worse. So if you see that arrow going up on the left, what increases both the intensity and duration of yuck is when the brain senses a threat. So if a child sees you yelling at them or judging them, or even sees you anxious, when they don't even aren't conscious of it, they sense your energy, which puts a lot of pressure on us. But when they sense that, their yuck is going to last longer. It's going to be more intense. So any type of threat, whether the threat is coming from us, whether the threat is in their own mind, where they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to see my friend. They're all going to be talking about this game that I'm not playing now. Wherever the threat is coming from, a threat makes it worse, which makes sense because we're talking fight or flight here. What eventually brings us down for every human being is a combination of safety and time. So safety is where the brain senses through energy. It's not through words. It's through energy, because the language part of the brain is also not really easily accessible. Through energy that they are safe. When they have a regulated adult near them, they will get through the curve more quickly. It's not fast because it does take time. The fight or flight response is a physiological response that occurs in the body, and all systems have to actually, it's like a moving train. The train has to slow down and turn back around the other way. The nervous system takes a little while. So this is ultimately how we get out of the yuck curve, or how we get out of, the cycle of yuck, is we actually have to be regulating ourselves in the moment.
Mhm.
So much of parenting in the moment is about regulation, because when we are regulated, we can access that prefrontal cortex, then we can handle situations. When they are regulated, they can handle, they can access their prefrontal cortex and they can handle situations. So you can see why I say this is not so easy. It's really not easy, but parenting in the moment really is about regulation.
Yeah. And I know one of the things you talk about all the time, and that was very helpful for me. And I'll stop myself to say that we are going to kind of talk about the proactive way of avoiding this, because this is more of like what happens a lot of times is that, we find that there's some yuck behavior, it triggers us, we get those things in our brain, they should be talking to us, whatever, that's so rude. And then as I say, it kind of climbs the ladder. And I think we'll notice that, hopefully all of you out there will notice that next time that is happening with somebody, whether it's spouse, it's child, whatever. And we're not saying what Rachel, I think I'm going to speak for you, of course, but what I've learned that you're not saying is that it's okay what they're doing. We're not saying that it's okay. It's not saying there shouldn't be some type of consequence. The point is that if this is happening in the moment, we cannot fix it in the moment because we're just going to keep climbing the ladder and it's going to take far too much of a withdrawal. So do you want to just mention that in a minute?
Absolutely.
And I'll actually move to the next slide.
Yeah, move to the next slide, but I will just reinforce what you just said. I used to say this all the time. I was a coach for many years. I was an ADHD coach for adolescents. I was a therapist. I worked with adolescents for many, many years. And I used to say all the time that yuck is a reason. It is never an excuse. Never, not once, not for us, not for our children. But what we have to, and yes, if you are a family that consequences, I realize I'm really blurry. So this is going to sound funny. I'm going to put my finger up to the camera for a sec because that actually fixes my camera. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. So it's never an excuse. And if you are a family that consequences, although I teach firm discipline without punishment, that's what I teach. But if you are a family that punishes, that's okay. Just realize that what I say in addition to do is teach them how to regulate, because this behavior stops when you teach them how to regulate. So our goal is the same. Behavior, unacceptable. It is not an excuse, but and I don't want to say but because I don't want to undo what I just said. It is not an excuse. And when we teach kids tools to regulate, when we have our own tools to regulate, the behavior goes away. Behavior is only a symptom. So let me talk about what we've talked about, the yuck curve in the moment. I just want to stress that what we need to do in the moment is help them feel safe, which is so counterintuitive. And the question everyone asks, and I know everyone would raise their hand if they could, well, if we're making them feel safe, aren't we reinforcing this behavior? You're not reinforcing the behavior. And again, we're going to address it, just not in the moment. Because if you address it in the moment, you're not effective. It's not going to work. So what we do instead, and I want things to work. I don't know about you, but I'm like, tell me what works. What we do instead is we actually, again, help kids regulate. How do we help them regulate? We actually understand their perspective. So the tool or strategy that it's really a tool, it's not a strategy, that humans have to make other humans, get out of yuck is connection. It's respect. It's when we realize the reason our child is freaking out, melting down, and being disrespectful is because they had planned to go to their friend's house for 2 weeks. And no, they didn't do their homework, so we can maintain our boundary, but they are really struggling. Our children are having a hard time. They are dysregulated and they don't have coping mechanisms. So the behavior you're seeing is simply a sign that their dysregulation is bigger than their coping mechanism. And they really, truly are struggling. So when we see things from their perspective, and I do exercises with parents to help them see their children's perspective. And when we can see their behavior, instead of judging their behavior, instead of saying they should not be talking to me like that, they cannot do that, this is not acceptable, that's really judgmental. Just asking yourself with curiosity, why are they doing that? What's going on for them? What happens when you start to care about their perspective and approach them with curiosity is your energy shifts. You are no longer a threat who is out to get them. Because remember, that I don't know if you know this, I'm not saying remember, but what you need to know is that the human brain within a millisecond can determine whether the person walking toward us is a threat or on our side. And if we are approaching them with all this judgment, they're in yuck. If we are showing them that we are on their side, then they actually calm down more easily. And once they calm down, either then or maybe later in the day, we absolutely start to address behavior. But you can't do it in the moment.
Which gets you to this next question of how can we change the story we're telling ourselves about the situation? And I know you talk a lot about just the thought that you're having help you reach your goal.
Exactly. So here's the thing is that if you remember that curve on the left-hand side of the curve was that word threat. And very honestly, what we tell ourselves about our child's behavior is going to determine whether we are in yuck. If we tell ourselves, like you were using that example, Debbie, which was such a great one, she shouldn't talk to me like that. She should be out of bed. Immediately, your brain senses a threat. This is bad. Bad things will happen, and you go into yuck. So what we need to do is what I call, and this, I didn't make this up, but we need to change our thoughts from non-useful thoughts to useful thoughts. So the thought, she shouldn't talk to me like that, is accurate. I'm not saying that, non-useful thoughts are often accurate, but they're not useful because they don't help us meet our goal. So if your goal is to help your child get out of bed or speak more respectfully, thinking she shouldn't talk to me like that is a non-useful thought. It's not going to help you meet your goal. It'll put you into fight or flight and everything will go downhill. Useful thoughts are simply thoughts that are also accurate. I never ask anyone to believe anything they don't believe, but there's a useful thought that will help you meet your goal. So if your child is speaking to you like that, a useful thought may be something like, you know what, I don't like how they're speaking to me. I can handle this though. And what that does is it allows you to address the situation in a more useful way. And you're so much more likely to meet the goal of motivating different behavior from them when you are out of yuck. A non-useful thought may be accurate, but it puts you in yuck, in fight or flight. A useful thought is also accurate, but it keeps you out of fight or flight. So one of the useful thoughts that I teach a lot of parents, and I did not make up this quote. There are like 10 quotes in my life I wish I had said myself, but I did not. But this one has been so valuable to me as a parent and the thousands of parents I've helped. You see it on this slide. Remember, when your child is misbehaving, they are not being a problem. They are having a problem. And that shift from a non-useful thought of there being a problem to a useful one of they're having a problem, all of a sudden you're compassionate. Because when we know our kids are struggling, that's what parents do. We help, we support, we regulate ourselves so they can regulate. So that shift can provide the bridge from a threat to not threat, and you can stay calm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's sometimes never more true when we see kids who are struggling with their homework because we sometimes hear they're not motivated, or that L word that I hate, lazy. I mean, these are challenges. It's really always that what's that need behind the behavior, right? What is the problem they're having? Because we can look into often the executive functions and what's underneath and see what that need is behind the behavior. And sometimes it's really just about helping to give them the skills and the strategies so that they feel more in control, which is something we're about to talk about. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention as we move on to kind of the bulk of these, specifically now, how can we help make the deposits into their emotional needs, which is, I know, the title of the presentation, is that, one of the things, speaking of quotes I wish I made up, is from Dr. Dalton, Jonathan Dalton, who was here at our last webinar and before. Many of you might have seen him. Is we want to water the weeds and water the seeds, and not the weeds. And when we're feeding into the yuck behavior, it is watering the weeds. Yeah. And so the idea is we want to put our energy and focus on the behavior that's the positive behavior and try to almost relieve any oxygen from going to the kind of negative behavior. And so we started getting some questions about what are the positive things that we can say. And Rachel is, so what can we do and what can we say, ladies? So we can't wait to get to this next part, which is the emotional needs. And so, of course, how can we make deposits? And really, to set this up, there are 5 areas of emotional needs that our children have and that we all have. And so let's talk a little bit about that. And then Rachel will specifically share with you what can we say to help our kids, help make deposits into those. And then maybe what should we say in some situations, or definitely things we'll cover in Q&A as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing people wanting to know what to do in the moment and the thoughts we should have. At the end, I want to answer these. Because
and sorry about the wrap here.
Yeah.
5 emotion Al needs.
Oh, that's okay.
That happens sometimes.
Those questions, absolutely, I'm going to answer at the end. I will tell you it's harder in the moment. So I want you to hear kind of what you do proactively, and then I will absolutely address what you do in the moment. Because I am a what do I say, what do I do kind of person. Okay. So Debbie, did you want to talk about these needs before I jump in?
Nope.
Okay.
Go for it.
So now that you understand yuck and why it's so hard to address it in the moment, I want to talk about, the question came up, what do you do to reduce this in the first place? And so there are 5 emotional needs that we all have. And it's interesting that we all know about the biological needs. And when our biological needs aren't met, it makes sense that we would go into yuck. If we're hungry, if we're tired, makes sense. Our brain would sense that as a threat, go into yuck. But what most people don't know is that we also have emotional needs. And these emotional needs, our brain actually doesn't differentiate biological needs from emotional needs. If it senses that any of these emotional needs are what I call low, you'll hear about what I mean in a moment. If they're low, our brain senses a threat. We go into yuck, you see the yuck behaviors. So as I describe these emotional needs, we're going to go through them one by one. I just want you to think of them like bank accounts. And that's why we use the word deposits and withdrawals. All 5 of these emotional needs are like bank accounts. With bank accounts, if we make more withdrawals than deposits, bad things happen. Same is true of these emotional needs. Our brains are literally calculating this all the time. Do we have more withdrawals from this account, or do we have more deposits? And what happens is when we have more deposits than withdrawals, we're out of yuck. When we have more withdrawals than deposits, we are in yuck. So one of the ways we reduce yuck in children and in adults, in every human being, is we make deposits. We make deposits into a child, we make deposits into a relationship, and they really stem from these areas. And the reason it's important to know these 5 is because this really leads to what is the action? What action do I take, which is what we're going to talk about. So the last thing I will just say, I really always emphasize this, that deposits are deposits into needs, not wants. So it's not about buying your children anything. They want that, but they don't need that. It's not about taking them places or doing nice things for them. It's not even about breaking the rules. So they say, can I please have a sleepover? And you've already said no. And you say, okay, well, fine. That is not a deposit into a need. That's a deposit into a want. Very honestly, if you're focusing on depositing into wants, what happens is kids become entitled and they kind of expect a lot. We want to deposit into needs, and these are the emotional needs. So if we want to go through them, we can start to do that. Okay, first emotional need is connection. We are social creatures by nature. We have a need to feel a part of something, a sense of belonging. So if you have a child who maybe feels different in some way, and you want to really think about all areas of their life, it could be that they feel different at school. It could be that they feel different at home. Maybe you have a family of 4 and 3 of you are really intellectual and they are really sporty or athletic and they just feel a little bit different. That could be an example of a withdrawal. They feel like, people just don't feel this sense of belonging somewhere. That's an example of a withdrawal. Now, I could come up with 20 withdrawals and deposits for each of these, but I want to give you just 1 or 2 so you get the general idea. And if you have questions later, we can talk about it more. So what is an example of a deposit? A really great example of a deposit into connection are things that I found people are really doing over COVID, which is more family rituals. And if you are not doing this, this is such a simple way to make a deposit if you find that your child is struggling in this area. So it could be Friday night pizza night. In fact, if people want to put in the chat what you're doing, I call these COVID rituals, but maybe you were doing it even before. Friday night pizza night, or walks after dinner, or games on Saturdays. If you aren't doing this and you want a really simple way to do this, because my job is always, let's make it simple for busy parents. Just take 1 meal a week, 1 meal, Wednesday night dinner, and do like breakfast for dinner and make that a ritual. So you can combine a lot of these deposits with things you're already doing. And that's one of the things I also love doing is telling parents how to get the biggest bang for your buck. So just combine it with something you're already doing and give that sense of belonging as a family. If you are already doing rituals, what I do recommend, believe it or not, is to maybe add your family name. So just something, this is what we Smiths do on Friday nights. It's Smith family night, pizza night. Now, those of you with adolescents and teenagers, which most of you have, I usually ask that in the beginning, I didn't this time. Your teenagers are gonna roll their eyes. I do lots of talks on parenting teenagers. I know teens really well because I was a therapist for a lot of years. Let them roll their eyes. Still creates a sense of belonging. So that's connection. That's the first emotional need. Friday night movie or game night, Sunday watching Sherlock Holmes at 6 while dinner. Yeah. What about older teens who don't want connection with the family, where they seek independence? So that's a great question, Anne. And I will tell you that even teenagers, again, I was a therapist for many years for teens. They want connection. It just looks different. One of the main tips I have is that you're going to get a lot less quantity time with teens. And the connection is very honestly going to be way more in their world than yours. So we may want them to come to the family dinner. But very honestly, where you might have to, if they don't want to connect right now, they may or may not, and I don't know your situation, Anne, at all, but a lot of teens don't want to connect because the relationship is not that strong to begin with. Again, that may not be true for you, but what you have to do is kind of take baby steps in their world to rebuild the connection, and then they start to want to come back. The other thing I will just quickly say about teens, because I want to move on to the next slide, but just keep in mind that teens often don't show us that they appreciate what we're doing. I mean, they never show us that they appreciate what we're doing. They roll their eyes, they complain. That's what they do, but we can't give up. When I was a therapist, here's what I will say that I learned as a therapist. They get frustrated when we try to reach out, but they notice when we don't. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, what are parents supposed to do? You know, you don't give us a good reaction, but you also get upset when we don't. And we have to be the bigger people and say, not that we expect disrespect or that's okay, but we have to maintain this relationship with our teens and build it back up slowly. And that's what I do. Build it back up slowly so that they do want to spend a little bit of time with you. But yeah, it's very age appropriate for them to want to be with their friends. Okay. Yeah. So you have to just think of having too much time with us. Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on because I don't want to spend too much time on each slide. All right, this is a huge one. There are two that are the most important, I find, only because they're relevant in almost every family. This is one of them. So significance is the need to know that we matter. So I feel like people understand me. People care about my perspective. People don't necessarily agree with me, but they respect me. And this seems like such a luxury, this need for significance. It is not a luxury. Just a really quick example for adults to put this in perspective. Remember the days where we used to drive a lot? It was pre-COVID. When we're driving and someone cuts us off, simple thing, cut us off, we go into fight or flight because when someone cuts us off, they're basically saying, I matter more than you do. The human brain can't handle that. And we make withdrawals from our kids all the time. And they make withdrawals from us for sure. But I will tell you, we are making so many withdrawals and their brains notice this. Just saying something as simple as, I know you're talking to your friends online, but it's time for dinner. Sounds so innocuous. That's a withdrawal because you're basically saying, I know you're doing something, I don't care. My agenda matters more than yours. And here's where I really want to emphasize, the goal is not to prevent withdrawals. If you think I don't say this to my children, you're crazy. I make withdrawals all the time. Honestly, we all do. But just like with a bank account, we don't say, oh, I'll never make withdrawals. Yeah, you make withdrawals. You just also have to make more deposits. That's what you really, really have to think about is deposits. And that's the goal of all of this. So an example deposit, and there's gosh, I have like 30 for this, but one really simple example of a deposit is to ask your child about something they care about. You know, we ask them about school and what's important to us. How was that test? Did you do your homework? Did you do the laundry? Take some time to ask about what matters to them. And especially if you, Laura, I will answer that. I will answer, I promise, all the in the moment questions at the end. I promise. So hold on to that one. If you take the time to ask them about something that matters to them, I always say it's an extra deposit because they know you don't care about whatever video game they're playing. But what you're basically saying is, no, I don't care about that video game, but I care about you. So I want to ask about it anyway. And if you can do this for like 30 seconds a day, just ask them one question and really listen. That's an example of a simple way to deposit.
Yeah. What tool did they earn or what level did they earn?
Exactly. What level are you on? Absolutely. And how did you get there? That's it. Perfect. I mean, I can't tell you how many times teens used to say to me, they ask me about, what they care about, but they don't really care about. Not only do they not care about what I like, but they poo-poo what I like and they disrespect what I like. That's too much of a withdrawal. A relationship can't handle that, very honestly. And you don't have to pretend. I always help parents find what possibly could you ask about. You don't have to ask about the video games, but you have to ask about something. So, all right, next emotional need is capability. This is the need to know that we have the ability to handle what we face on a day-to-day basis. I can handle what I face in life, or just as importantly, I can handle it even if I can't do something. I'll still be okay. So if your child struggles with executive functioning skills, which are so taxed during online, distance learning, those are huge withdrawals from the need for capability. If they struggle with peer relationships, if they struggle with any skill that they need to use, those are huge withdrawals. So there are lots of ways that you can help them feel more capable. But one of the things I think that's overlooked for parents is when they struggle with something, we tend to just go right to the strategies, and this is what you should do about it. And strategies are super important. That's why it's actually on this slide. Strategies matter, but I would suggest backing up one step and saying what makes it hard to pay attention during distance learning, to do your homework without rushing, to be nicer to your brother or sister. At first, you're going to get a flippant response, but ultimately, when you actually ask this question, and I'm preparing a podcast episode on this one too, when you ask them what's hard about it, it is like a golden nugget that helps you understand where they feel incapable. So something as simple as, well, it's hard to be on distance learning because it's boring. Right there, that tells you they need a strategy to help them do boring things. We assume they should know how to do that. Debbie could speak to this and Lindsay could speak to this. They don't know how to do that. That's a strategy they need to learn. So asking what's hard about it can really be a great doorway into, where do they feel incapable? All right, so I mentioned that significance is a huge one. The other huge one is this one, which is control. We all have a need for control. This is the need to know that we have some say in our lives. I feel in control of my life versus people or circumstances controlling me. This is why our brain needs predictability. Predictability helps us feel in control. We panic as human beings immediately when we feel out of control. So one of the ways we withdraw from our kids is we have a certain expectation of them, of how quickly they do their homework, of how they clean their room, of how they brush their teeth. We have lots of expectations. It's not wrong that we have expectations, but we do. And we try very hard to get our kids, to make our kids meet expectations. I will tell you, this is a red flag for me as someone who now works with parents and not teens anymore. Whenever a parent says to me, how do I get my child to? How do I make my child? How do I make sure that? These are all red flags to me that you are trying to control your child, and you can't. So I talk about influencing children. You can't control your child. And we are often trying to control them, which makes us feel more out of control and makes them feel controlled. Lots of power struggles happen because of that. So an example of a deposit, especially if you have a child age 5 and above, is I teach a strategy called joint problem solving, where they should absolutely be involved with plans and consequences. We rack our brains thinking about, okay, if you do get on your phone after 10, the rule is no phone after 10. If you do get onto your phone after 10, what is the consequence? We're like, parents come to me, Rachel, what's the best consequence? You shouldn't be coming up with those consequences. Allowing your children to come up with those consequences is one example of giving them a sense of control. Now, they may come up with stupid consequences. Try it. What I always say during this joint problem solving strategy is come back. If it didn't work, we're going to change the consequence. Now, ultimately, too, if you have older children, they need to learn how to self-consequence. So not only does having them involved in consequences help them feel more in control, but it actually eventually teaches them how to monitor their own behavior. So that's a really big topic that I could talk more about, but I wanted to just start to give you an understanding of what a deposit is. All right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I've been shocked at how fair they are when they're coming up with consequences. Yeah. Okay, so last emotional need, because I know we want to get to questions. Last emotional need is security. This is the need to know that we're going to be okay. This is what we talked about in the beginning, why it's very hard during COVID, because there are real reasons we might not be okay. If your child has allergies, there's a real reason you worry about your child. There are real life-threatening issues going on. So what a withdrawal is, what's happening right now, this lack of predictability. So what is an example of a deposit? Very interestingly, one of the best ways we can help kids, especially during this time, and I've done presentations just on this topic, one of the best ways we can help kids when we can't create predictability for them, which we can't, is to learn how to sit with them in their feelings. The ability to say to them, so let's say your child is anxious, and they're saying, what's gonna happen? When are things gonna get back to normal? Why can't I go to prom? How's this gonna affect college? Whatever they're asking. We can't tell them that. But if you can say something like, if you don't get sucked in, that's the key, learning how to not get sucked in. And that's, again, something I teach a lot of parents. If you don't get sucked in, you say something like, you know what, I don't know. What I do know is we're in this together and we're going to get through it together. I can't tell you how safe that makes a child or adolescent feel. They don't need predictability all the time. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know a strong adult has got their back. So one of the best ways you can deposit into security, ironically, is to learn yourself how to handle their emotions and how not to get sucked into their yuck. All right, so those are the 5 emotional needs, withdrawals and deposits.
That's really helpful. I mean, I think I remember the first time that you shared all of those 5 emotional needs, and I thought to myself, connection, significance, capability, control, security. I thought about my son and remembered thinking, boy, I think he's probably struggling in a lot of those, and it explained a lot at that time, a lot of his behaviors. So I thought that was really helpful. But we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to kind of move to
Questions.
talking about them as we are letting people read this slide. We are sharing the webinar, and I will transition to the questions by saying that some of these things, of course, it is important when we say these things, right? As we're sitting down and asking questions such as what makes it hard for you to do your homework or, get started. It is a time where there isn't a lot of emotion, where we're kind of sitting emotionally next to them. And we often ask, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be different about distance learning? What would be different about, getting through this class? What would be different about your teacher, about yourself, about your friend, and then it's on almost like abstracting it so that they can talk about it. Or what would your friends say about distance learning? Just because I think sometimes we do find that, a better time to kind of hear from them and make those connections. But so there are some separate, and I think that's a little bit of what Mara's saying here. There's some separate questions specifically. We'll start with the one about dinner, because it seems to be a popular topic. Asking kids to come to dinner.
Yeah.
How do we do that, Rachel?
Yes. So here's what I will say is that I mentioned that the withdrawal, and I'm so glad this came back up. The withdrawal is, I know you're on your device, but it makes so much sense from our perspective. It is a huge withdrawal, and sometimes you're going to say that, but you're not going to get results from that. What you need to understand is that there's a reason they're not getting off of their device, and it's actually a strategy that's missing. It's an executive functioning strategy or skill that Lindsay and Debbie could explain even more about. But they actually have a hard time transitioning as well. So when the brain is engaged in an activity, to stop doing what they're doing and move to the next activity is actually really hard. And it's hard for us as well. So just keep this in mind. If you're like writing an email and you kind of, your mind is in there and you're engaged, and a child comes up to you and says, hey mom, or hey dad, can you talk to me? You get really annoyed. It's because once our brains are very goal oriented, and once we're engaged in a task, it's hard to disengage. So I would just set the scene knowing that what you're asking them to do is actually difficult for them. It puts them in yuck, and that's why you get the big responses. So a couple of things to think about. I'll tell you what to do in the moment, but even better, start proactively and realize that what the brain needs is closure. Once we're out of the mind place, the mindset we're in, it's actually very easy to transition off of our device and come to the dinner table. So you actually want to teach your child this, especially again, about age 5 and up, they can know this, and absolutely adolescents, teenagers need to know this. So a couple things to think about with devices. The 5-minute, 2-minute warnings, those do not work. Many of you probably know that. I gave my kids a 5-minute warning and they still don't come to the dinner table. That's because just because you gave them a warning doesn't help them disengage from what they were doing. They're still engaged at the end of the 5-minute warning. So what we do instead is we teach them to create closure. Now there are a couple ways to do this. It could be related to an end point of the activity. As young kids, that's really easy. It could be the end of the TV show. It could be the end of whatever. As kids get older, it's harder. So one of the things I say to parents of older kids is tell them before they start how much time they have left. And if there is no closure point 20 minutes before, they might not want to even start. So that's just something to think about, is that you can't just ask a child to get off of the device. It's not going to work. You're going to get those power struggles, that yuck. But I know you want to know what to do in the moment. So here are some suggestions for what to do in the moment. Very generally, what you want to do with any behavior in the moment. Number 1, regulate yourself. First thing in the moment, always regulate yourself. If you approach them negatively because you've just asked them 5 times to get off of the screen, they're going to sense that. They're going to shut down. They're going to go more into yuck. So approach them from a place of your own regulation. Remember, I said in the moment parenting is a lot about regulation. Then what you do is you help them, you try to give them a tool. You try to help them be successful. You say, okay, you're right in the middle of doing something. Realize they're engaged. Say, hey, can you tell me about what video game you're playing as we walk to the dinner table? So help them with this transition. When you get yuck, remember, a child is struggling. If you can help them with the tool they're missing, you're going to get a better response. So just saying you are right in the middle of something, that's respectful. Instead of saying, I know you're in the middle of something, but, which is disrespectful, saying you're right in the middle of something, it is dinner time, why don't you tell me about what you're going to do? Now, if that doesn't work, so in the moment, I mentioned first step, calm yourself. Second step, figure out why they're not doing what you ask and give them the tool. Third step, always in the moment, is to reset the boundary. It is time for dinner, and they're going to get upset. That's fine. Let them get upset. What has to happen in the moment is they have to simply travel the yuck curve. If you don't get sucked into yuck, they're going to travel the curve more quickly. Once they get out all that yuck, that frustration and annoyance with you, they are going to do what they're supposed to do. Now, if they have a ton of yuck inside, which very honestly a lot of adolescents and adolescents do, it's going to take longer, because when we're in yuck, we don't just respond to the yuck of they asked me to get off the device. It's the yuck that's in my body from all day long. But ultimately, in the moment parenting is about, number one, regulating yourself. Number two, trying to give them a tool to be successful, helping with the transition, helping with the boredom of cleaning, whatever strategy they're missing. And if that doesn't quote unquote work, ultimately you need to just get firm and let them get upset. So the in the moment parenting strategy is not fun. It's not easy. That's why I don't love it. That's why I teach so many proactive tools, but that's handling behavior firmly and respectfully in the moment. So I hope that helps. Okay, I didn't see the questions that were coming through while I was talking.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. And you know what? It is 10:01. I know you wanted to share something really quickly about this, so that people know how to get a hold of you.
Yes.
Although your email address was supposed to be on there, it must have gone into a different color, but we do have it on the next slide.
Okay, so yeah, so here's what I want to tell you is that I am full of lots of tips. I have lots of ways to access those tips. Many of you know I have a newsletter. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, we're actually, my partner and I are gonna throw in a bonus for you. You want these say this, not that phrases. So what I want you to do, the email address isn't on there. It's info at,
right here.
Or that's fine. It's fine. That's good. You can either do info at or rachel@rachel-bailey.com. And what I would like you to do is tell me, if you go back, Debbie, one slide, which of these say this, not that phrases. This is an example of them. I said suggest phrases instead of saying this, say this, just in the subject line. And you can do this right now. Yeah, thank you. Perfect, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Just write in the subject line. You don't have to say anything in the body. Big emotions. Do you have a child with big emotions? Do you want to motivate more positive behavior? Do you want to reduce stress of your own? Type in the subject line which of those you're interested in, and we will send you the say this, not that as a thank you, and then you will be put on my free tips email newsletter. You get my podcast episodes. So that is what that slide is.
The tips just seem to come perfectly on time. So
yeah.
I do want to say thank you very much for being here, and I'll leave actually this up in case people need it. I think thanks everybody for your great participation. We do have a study skills class starting this weekend if anyone's interested, and we're here for Homework Center and coaching. So we really appreciate our community. We will have another webinar in November with a school psychologist from Fairfax County. So we're very excited about how specifically to speak to your children. So it will just be a great addition to this one, and watch for that to be coming out soon. But Rachel, it's always a pleasure and honor and a learning experience to be with you. And thank you so much for all your great comments, everybody. We hope you have a great day and weekend and week. And I have to say to everyone, go vote. It's that season.
Go vote.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye, everyone.